That knock on my door changed my entire life. It wasn't from a friend, not from a neighbor, and definitely not from real law enforcement. Standing on my porch was a man in black tactical gear, a shiny badge on his belt, and a gun on his hip. From a distance, he might have fooled anyone, but with one quick glance, I knew he wasn't law enforcement. On the badge there was no county name, no state seal. Just a few cheap words. HOA Enforcement Division. A fake cop. A man the HOA hired to intimidate, to make families like mine bow their heads. And to him, a black man who had just moved into Brookside Estates, was easy prey. But he miscalculated. Badly. And that mistake brought down the entire HOA. I bought this house with one simple wish: peace. After years of grinding in construction and saving every dollar, I believed Brookside Estates would be the place where my family could finally breathe, leaving behind noise, chaos, and the constant vigilance that comes with being a black man in the city. The ads made it sound like a little paradise. Tree-lined streets, kids laughing as they rode bikes in the sun, neighbors waving cheerfully over their mailboxes. I imagined my son running free without me having to repeat over and over, "Don't go too far, and be careful if the police stop you." In Brookside, I hoped it would be different. The new house wasn't a mansion, but to me, it was a dream. A green lawn, a wide porch for Sunday morning coffee, a garage big enough for my old but reliable pickup truck. It all seemed perfect. But soon I noticed the looks from a few neighbors as my family moved in. They didn't wave, didn't smile like in the ads. They just watched silently, as if asking, "Does this family really belong here?" I brushed it off. Strangers are curious, I told myself. But then, that knock on the door came. The knock came on a Saturday morning, just as I poured my first cup of coffee. It wasn't the friendly kind of knock from a neighbor bringing over a welcome pie. It was heavy, urgent, like it wanted to shatter the peace. I opened the door, and there stood a man dressed almost like a cop. Black vest, big block letters, a shiny badge on his belt, and a gun on his hip. At first glance, he looked official enough to fool anyone. But with one look, I knew something was off. The badge had no county, no state seal. Just a few gaudy words: HOA Enforcement Division. "Morning," he said curtly, trying to mimic a cop's authority. "We've had some complaints about your property. I'm here to conduct a compliance check." I frowned. Complaints about what? He glanced at his clipboard, pretending to read off a list. Lawn height, improper waste bin placement, possible violations of the parking covenant. I almost laughed. I'd been here less than a week. All I had done was mow the lawn and line up the bins. But what caught my attention wasn't his words. It was the way his hand hovered near the gun on his hip. That was the first red flag. "You're not county," I said slowly. "And you sure as hell aren't law enforcement. You've got no business here acting like you do." His jaw tightened. "Sir, refusal to comply can result in fines, liens, even escalation. I suggest you cooperate. This neighborhood is under HOA protection." OA protection? I almost laughed. A homeowners association, thinking it was the police? But the gun at his side killed the laugh in my throat. This wasn't a joke. I crossed my arms. "Do you have a warrant? Any legal document giving you authority here?" His eyes darkened, surprised I wasn't afraid. Maybe he thought a black man living in an all-white neighborhood like Brookside would bow his head right away, but he was wrong. I didn't buy a home here to live in fear. "I'll consider this your warning," he growled, leaning closer so his shadow fell over me. He tapped his baton against his thigh, each knock cold. Next time we escalate. The HOA doesn't tolerate non-compliance. With that, he smirked, turned, and walked down the steps. His boots hit the concrete, the truck door slammed, and his tires screeched as he drove off. I stood there, coffee gone cold in my hand, blood boiling in my veins. I knew this wasn't the end of it. I didn't wait for them to come back before taking action. That afternoon, I drove straight to the county sheriff's office, carrying every detail in my memory. The fake badge, the useless clipboard, the gun on his hip, and the way he tapped his baton to intimidate me. The desk deputy, a young officer, listened and typed as I spoke. When I mentioned the badge that only read HOA Enforcement Division, his eyebrows shot up. If what you're saying is true, that's a felony. Texas Penal Code 37.11, impersonating a public servant. And if you felt threatened by his weapon, we could also consider Penal Code 22.01, assault by threat. He sounded serious, but I could hear the lack of urgency in his tone. Not because he didn't believe me, but because he thought, it's just the, oh, what's the big deal? I signed the report and carefully noted the case number. I knew they wouldn't be sending a SWAT team to Brookside, but at least I had laid the groundwork. If they escalated, it wouldn't just be my word against theirs. 2 days passed, outwardly calm. I mowed the lawn, fixed some wooden steps, tried to act normal, but I knew they'd be back. I saw their white truck with the HOA logo circling the neighborhood, stopping in front of houses before moving on. Nobody came out. Nobody waved. Neighbors shut their doors tight, as if they'd grown used to it. That night, my son Jamal asked softly, "Dad, why did they come to our house?" I didn't want to lie. Because they think we're easy to push around. But they're wrong, and you don't need to worry. We're not alone. I said it because I knew Marcus was still staying with us. Marcus wasn't a close friend or distant relative. He was a former Special Forces soldier, an old buddy of my younger brother. When Jamal hit his teenage years, I hired Marcus as a bodyguard and mentor. With his towering frame and eyes sharp as blades, Marcus didn't need many words to make people cautious. But to my family, he was a shield. On Tuesday morning, I was heading to my truck when the knock came again. This time I wasn't surprised. I took a deep breath and opened the door. 2 men stood there. One I recognized instantly, the scowl, the faint scar on his cheek, the same guy from before. He smirked when he saw me. Beside him was a stranger, shorter but bulkier, eyes darting like a predator. Both wore matching vests. White block letters reading HOA Enforcement, fake badges glinting in the sun. "We're back to finish what we started," Scarface said, teeth clenched. I stood firm on the porch. "You're repeating a crime. I've already filed a report with the sheriff. Step 1 foot closer and it's criminal trespass. Texas Penal Code 30.05. Look it up." The shorter one laughed, slapping his baton into his palm. "Listen to this guy, quoting laws like a lawyer. You think we care?" Before I could react, his baton cracked across my ribs. White-hot pain exploded in my side, dropping me to one knee, hand gripping the railing. I gritted my teeth, struggling to stay upright. "Lesson 1, he growled. "Nobody stands up to the HOA." And then, a deep gravelly voice came from behind me. "You just made a big mistake." The door swung open. Marcus stepped out tall, broad-shouldered, like a wall of steel. His stare froze the air. The 2 men hesitated. Just for a second. Scarface squinted. "Who the hell are you?" Marcus stepped down one stair, voice low and steady. "The man who's ending this. Step back." The shorter one laughed and swung his baton again. But Marcus caught his wrist mid-swing and twisted hard. A sharp crack rang out. The man screamed, dropping his baton onto the concrete. Marcus didn't let go. He drove his knee into the man's ribs. Another crack, bones breaking. The man collapsed, clutching his side, froth spilling from his mouth. Scarface roared, charging with his baton raised. Marcus spun, blocked with his forearm, then slammed his elbow like a hammer into the man's jaw. The sound was sickening, like a branch snapping. The man fell back, blood spilling from his mouth. Marcus grabbed his vest and slammed him to the pavement, his head hitting the asphalt with a heavy thud. I stood there clutching my ribs, watching a scene straight out of combat training. Marcus didn't shout or waste a single move. Every motion was clean, precise, decisive. The whole neighborhood held its breath. I saw curtains twitch, neighbors peeking out. The same neighbors who once stayed silent as the HOA cops strutted by were now watching them broken and beaten on my driveway. Marcus planted his knee into Scarface's back, pinning him, and growled, "Listen well. Impersonating an officer 3rd-degree felony. Assault with a weapon 2nd-degree felony. Trespass, enough to put you away for a long time." The man with the broken wrist whimpered. Scarface stammered through blood and spit. You'll regret this. The HOA won't forgive you." Marcus leaned close, voice like ice. "The HOA isn't the law. And I don't fear you." Sirens wailed at the end of the street, red and blue lights flashing. Marcus slowly raised his hands as the sheriff's cruisers rolled up. 2 deputies jumped out, guns drawn. They saw Marcus towering over Scarface and me clutching my bruised ribs. "Step away, now!" One barked. Marcus backed off calmly, no resistance. They attacked first. "Check their weapons." I raised my voice, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. These men trespassed and beat me with batons. They impersonated cops, claimed to be HOA enforcement. "I filed a report already. Here's the case number." I held out the report slip, my hand shaking with pain and fury. The deputies bent down and flipped the vests. Sure enough, cheap plastic plates reading HOA Enforcement Division. One of them groaned. "Wrist, ribs, help." Silence spread through the street. Curtains pulled wide. The neighbors saw it with their own eyes. The HOA cops they feared for months were just frauds, and now they were in cuffs. Sirens still echoed as the deputies cuffed the imposters. Neighbors peeked through curtains, some even stepping onto their porches, hands covering their mouths at the sight of the 2 bloodied, broken men. I clutched my throbbing ribs, but inside I burned. This wasn't some petty scare tactic anymore. This was a real crime. One deputy, white, buzzcut, turned to me. "Mr. Carter, we need your statement. You're saying these men claim to be law enforcement?" I nodded firmly. They wore vests, fake badges, carried guns and batons. They knocked on my door twice, threatened me. And this morning, they assaulted me on my porch. I filed a report 2 days ago. Here's the case number. I handed him the slip I had folded neatly in my wallet. His expression shifted as he read it. Marcus stood still, hand still raised, voice calm. "I only stepped in when they attacked Mr. Carter. I used only the necessary force to neutralize them." The man with the broken wrist groaned, crawling. He tried to kill us. He broke my arm." The younger deputy scoffed. "A guy his size? I don't see restraint here." I stepped forward, voice harder than ever. "If it weren't for him, I'd be in the hospital or worse. Look at me. I was beaten on my own porch. I'm the victim, not the aggressor. And if you hesitate any longer, this whole neighborhood will think the sheriff's office is covering for imposters." I raised my voice. loud enough for the gathering neighbors to hear. I wanted everyone to know the truth. I wanted light shining directly on the shadow the HOA had cast. The buzzcut deputy looked around, meeting the stares of the neighbors. He sighed, grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is a 10 to 15. 2 suspects in custody for impersonating a public servant and aggravated assault with a weapon. Requesting EMS and investigation unit." Hearing those words, I felt my whole body lighten. Finally, the wall of silence was cracking. Within 20 minutes, ambulances arrived. The 2 men were treated right on the street. One had his wrist bent grotesquely, screaming as paramedics splinted it. The other's jaw hung slack, teeth broken, blood filling his mouth. They were loaded onto stretchers and into the ambulance, sirens wailing as they sped off. An investigation team arrived, snapping photos and collecting evidence. The blood-stained batons, the torn vests. The clipboard scrawled with bogus violations about lawns and trash bins. I pointed to each item, recounting everything from the very first knock. "Mr. Carter," one investigator asked, "you're certain the HOA sent them?" "I'm certain. They said it themselves. The HOA doesn't tolerate non-compliance. And they targeted me because they thought I'd be scared. You know why?" The investigator frowned. I stared him dead in the eye. "Because I'm the only black man on this street." No one answered, but their silence said enough. In the days that followed, the story spread across Brookside. I overheard neighbors murmuring. "Carter got beaten on his own porch. This HOA. They've been out of line for a long time. They fined me once for hanging a teen flag on my porch. They carried guns? That's insane." The whispers turned into open conversations. People started comparing their stories to mine, the bogus fines. The threats of, "We'll lien your house." Elderly folks being forced to pay security fees. And for the first time, they saw it clearly. The HOA wasn't just a homeowners association. It was an abusive organization. 3 days later, I got a call from a civil rights law office. A woman's voice came through clear, professional. "Mr. Carter, we've heard about your case. This isn't just impersonation or assault. We believe the HOA is running a discriminatory policy, targeting families of color. Would you be willing to join a class action suit?" I froze for a moment. The idea of suing the HOA had always felt like a distant storm, but now it was right in front of me. "I'm ready," I said. "If we don't stand up, they'll just keep trampling others." The following week, the law office filed motions for subpoenas against the HOA. Piece by piece, the truth spilled out. Internal messages. Emails from the HOA president to the enforcement team. The Carter family needs to be reminded that we have rules here. If they won't comply, show them who controls the neighborhood. Don't let their lawn set a bad example, especially since they don't meet Brookside standards. Those last words were obvious. Don't meet the standards. A polite way of saying, they're black. The whole neighborhood buzzed. Families who once stayed silent now held up printed emails, reading them aloud to reporters. One late night, when the media noise had quieted, Marcus and I sat on the porch. I asked, "Did you ever think it would blow up like this?" Marcus shook his head, eyes deep. "I only know one thing: when injustice knocks, you stand tall and answer." You did. And now the whole neighborhood sees the truth. I looked out at the tree-lined street. Porch lights glowed softly. No HOA truck prowling, no threatening knocks. For the first time since moving here, I felt something close to peace. Impersonating a public servant, 3rd-degree felony. Aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, 2nd-degree felony. Criminal trespass, class A misdemeanor. Conspiracy to commit fraud and extortion of residents. As those charges echoed in the courtroom, I noticed a few neighbors in the back row nodding slightly, as if justice had finally called the crimes by their true names. Marcus was there too, dressed in a white shirt, sitting quietly. When the defense lawyer tried to argue, they were just following HOA orders. Marcus smirked. He knew better. Following orders doesn't erase a crime. If it had only been those two men, the story would have been big enough. But when subpoenas hit the HOA board, emails and texts spilled out, and everything blew wide open. Direct texts to the enforcement team. If the Carter family resists, make them afraid. People like them usually leave quickly. A spreadsheet showing fines collected from Black and Asian households, twice as high as those from white families. The media seized it, turning Brookside Estates into national news. Major outlets showed me standing in front of my house, recounting the first knock. Nub Biu Tung Sies Fan Kang. Footage of Marcus pinning the imposter to the pavement appeared everywhere, becoming a symbol of resistance. What I didn't expect was the neighbors, the same ones who had been cold when my family moved in, finally stepping out of their silence. An elderly woman, voice trembling, told reporters she'd been threatened with losing her home for putting out flowers in the wrong color pot. A young couple admitted they'd been forced to pay a security fee every month, even though their mortgage contract never mentioned it. An Asian family, silent until now, confessed they too had been knocked on and threatened by the HOA cops right in front of their children. The voices gathered into a wave. Brookside was silent no more. Those who once bowed their heads now stood tall, because they saw, if I could fight back, so could they. The class action lawsuit dragged on for months. Our lawyers presented every piece of evidence, every testimony. The court ruled. The HOA had abused power and engaged in systemic discrimination. The HOA's assets were seized to compensate victims. The HOA board members faced additional charges of conspiracy to defraud and incitement of assault. The HOA president, the one who had written emails targeting my family, left the courtroom with his head hung, cameras flashing. A few months later, the HOA was officially dissolved. Brookside Estates no longer had a rigid board, no more HOA cops. A new service company was hired for maintenance and security, but no one had the right to knock on doors and intimidate residents anymore. One Sunday afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the trees, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee. Jamal played basketball with friends down the street. Their laughter echoed down the block, a sound I once thought I'd never hear here. Marcus came out, leaning on the railing, his eyes softer than usual. "See?" I said, voice lighter. Peace finally came. Marcus nodded but didn't smile. "Remember, peace doesn't come on its own. It has to be fought for." I stayed silent, but his words carved deep inside me. He was right. My story wasn't just about an abusive HOA. It was a reminder that false power always exists, hiding behind uniforms, flashing weapons, believing fear will make people submit. But that day, on my porch, I learned one thing. A uniform doesn't make a coward a cop. A weapon doesn't turn lies into law. And silence never brings peace. When a community stands together, when truth is brought into the light, even those who seem the strongest will fall. The HOA fell. The two imposters now sit in prison. The discriminatory emails became evidence in court. And Brookside Estates at last was a place where my son could run and laugh without bowing to so-called HOA rules. I looked out at the street. Peaceful air wrapped around it. But I knew, beneath that calm was a reminder that would never fade. Justice doesn't come from men in fake armor. Justice comes when we stand and say, "Enough."